Ever since I was a little girl, seeing Star Wars for the first time, I've been fascinated by this idea of personal robots. And as a little girl, I loved the idea of a robot that interacted with us much more like a helpful, trusted sidekick, something that would delight us, enrich our lives, and help us save a galaxy or two. So I knew robots like that didn't really exist, but I knew I wanted to build them. So 20 years pass. I am now a graduate student at MIT studying artificial intelligence. The year is 1997, and NASA has just landed the first robot on Mars. But robots are still not in our home, ironically. And I remember thinking about all the reasons why that was the case. But one really struck me. Robotics had really been about interacting with things, not with people. Certainly not in a social way that would be natural for us and would really help have people accept robots into our daily lives. For me, that was the white space. That's what robots could not do yet. And so that year, I started to build this robot Kismet, the world's first social robot. So 3 years later, a lot of programming, working with other graduate students in the lab, Kismet was ready to start interacting with people.
Dude, I want to show you something. This is a watch that my girlfriend gave me. Yeah, look, it's got a little blue light in it too. You're like, I almost lost it this week.
So Kismet interacted with people a lot like kind of a nonverbal child or preverbal child, which I assume was fitting because it was really the first of its kind. It didn't speak language, but it didn't matter. This little robot was somehow able to tap into something deeply social within us. And with that, the promise of an entirely new way we could interact with robots. So over the past several years, I've been continuing to explore this interpersonal dimension of robots, now at the Media Lab with my own team of incredibly talented students. And one of my favorite robots is Leonardo. We developed Leonardo in collaboration with Stan Winston Studio. And so I want to show you a special moment for me of Leo. This is Matt Berlin interacting with Leo, introducing Leo to a new object. And because it's new, Leo doesn't really know what to make of it. But sort of like us, he can actually learn about it from watching Matt's reaction.
Hello, Leo. Leo, this is Cookie Monster. Can you find Cookie Monster? Leo, Cookie Monster is very bad. He's very bad, Leo. Cookie Monster is very, very bad. He's a scary monster who wants to get your cookies.
All right, so Leo and Cookie might have gotten off to a little bit of a rough start, but they get along great now. So what I've learned through building these systems is that robots are actually a really intriguing social technology, where it's actually their ability to push our social buttons and to interact with us like a partner that is a core part of their functionality. And with that shift in thinking, we can now start to imagine new questions, new possibilities for robots that we might not have thought about otherwise. But what do I mean when I say push our social buttons? Well, one of the things that we've learned is that if we design these robots to communicate with us using the same body language, the same sort of nonverbal cues that people use, like Nexi, our humanoid robot, is doing here, what we find is that people respond to robots a lot like they respond to people. People use these cues to determine things like how persuasive someone is, how likable, how engaging, how trustworthy. Turns out it's the same for robots. It's turning out now that robots are actually becoming a really interesting new scientific tool to understand human behavior, to answer questions like, how is it that from a brief encounter we're able to make an estimate of how trustworthy another person is? Mimicry is believed to play a role, but how? Is it the mimicking of particular gestures that matter? It turns out it's really hard to learn this or understand this from watching people, because when we interact, we do all of these cues automatically. We can't carefully control them because they're subconscious for us. But with a robot, you can. And so in this video here, this is a video taken from David DeSteno's lab at Northeastern University. He's a psychologist we've been collaborating with. There's actually a scientist carefully controlling Nexi's cues to be able to study this question. And the bottom line is the reason why this works is because it turns out people just behave like people, even when interacting with a robot. So given that key insight, we can now start to imagine new kinds of applications for robots. For instance, if robots do respond to our nonverbal cues, maybe they would be a cool new communication technology. So imagine this. What about a robot accessory for your cell phone? You call your friend, she puts her handset in a robot, and bam, you're a MeBot. You can make eye contact, you can talk with your friends, you can move around, you can gesture. Maybe the next best thing to really being there. Or is it? To explore this question, my student Siggy Eldergissen did a study where we brought human participants, people, into our lab to do a collaborative task with a remote collaborator. The task involved things like looking at a set of objects on the table, discussing them in terms of their importance and relevance to performing a certain task. This ended up being a survival task. And then rating them in terms of how valuable and important they thought they were. The remote collaborator was an experimenter from our group where they used one of 3 different technologies to interact with the participants. So the first was just the screen, so this is like video conferencing today. The next was to add mobility, so have the screen on a mobile base. This is sort of like if you're familiar with any of the telepresence robots today, this is sort of mirroring that situation. And then the fully expressive MeBot. So after the interaction, we asked people to rate their quality of interaction with the technology, with the remote collaborator through this technology in a number of different ways. We looked at psychological involvement. How much empathy did you feel for the other person? We looked at overall engagement. And we looked at their desire to cooperate. And this is what we see when they use just the screen. It turns out when you add mobility, just the ability to roll around the table,